You're listening to Platform 6 Cantina, a Star Wars The Old Republic podcast. We're glad you could join us.
Welcome to the Platform 6 Cantina podcast. I am Bodhi.
And I am Mara. And this is Proclamation 6, Revelations, Unraveling Threads of Destiny.
Oh my God. Oh my gosh, Mara. Where do we start?
I don't know. We have so much to say.
There's a very, very good reason that we have not yet released Proclamation 6 until this very moment. And I think Haskell might begin to describe this best.
A new thread weaves through fate's tapestry, as I foresaw.
We found ourselves sitting in front of a figurative spindle as we unpacked this content update. As we let the story revelations regarding Arcann sink in, multiple threads started unraveling themselves out of the spindle, presenting themselves to us. This story update was much bigger and more profoundly impacting than we ever expected it to be.
Mm-hmm.
We aren't exaggerating at all when we claim that this update has significantly enhanced and enriched Arcann's character and story and has fundamentally altered the way that we will play and view the events of KOTET and beyond going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to start by gently teasing the threads out of this spindle for you after we provide you with a special moment. And this is a moment that means everything for both the character of Arcann, but also for us as fans of this wonderful content.
Oh, it's so good. It just, that track hits so hard. And I have one thing to say that I think you would agree with, Mara, and that is, Arcann, you are so captivating to us fans. It is difficult to find the words to say how grateful we are for you.
It is indeed.
With that, I guess we should start off with how we're going to unravel these threads. And Mara and I quickly realized that we can't easily summarize this 7.3 story update in a single proclamation. There was way too much added to the story to even try to cover any aspect of it in one sitting, let alone one proclamation. So the more that we sat down to discuss the content, the more we realized that we needed to coax each of these threads out of the story update and give them the attention that they deserved in their own proclamation. So with that being said, without further ado, we present the framework and their corresponding threads. So first we have parasocial relationships and fandom, the concept of home and uncanny space, visions, prophecies, fate, and destiny, the hero's journey, boss mysticism and Arcann's visions, the state of the Arcann romance, redemption arcs, companion letters, and Arcann and the power of touch.
Yeah. So just to make it absolutely clear, this is everything that we took away that we felt that we could make an entire independent proclamation about based on just the relatively short 2 scenes that we had with Arcann and Sanaray in this update. So that's a lot. We have hours of content that we can talk about just based on these 2 scenes.
Yeah, honestly, it could be like literally months of content. It's just mind blowing to sit back and take all of this in
Mhm.
We could spend
Yeah.
just so much time breaking apart every second of the scenes. It's
Yeah.
just wonderful. So we're now cool, calm, and collected in regard to the fact that we can go through the 7-3 story update without getting too emotional about it. And I will give full disclosure. I took off 2 days from work to to spend time going through the content with Mara, and maybe immediately do a proclamation summarizing or just going over the things that we took away from the story update. But we found that we couldn't do it. It was too soon.
Yeah, we actually needed some distance because we just found it so hard to be analytical about this content because it meant so much to us. We waited such a long time, and the scenes we had were just so emotionally impactful for us.
And we'll break down why. Because as Int Jays, as we mentioned before, our first reaction to getting emotional about such content was, why am I feeling this way?
What are these feelings and why?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. How does this happen? Why does this happen? How did these 2 scenes affect us so tremendously? And I have to say, as someone who doesn't get weepy, this content really, really affected me. And I am first to admit, I literally sat outside of the instance on Voss for probably 3 minutes trying to compose myself before reuniting with the character of Arcann after so many years being apart.
Oh,
It's true. It really did. It hit so hard, and I was like, this is happening. This is really happening. And I had to prepare myself, and it was so out of character, I guess, for me.
yeah,
So
that
this
is out of character for you.
Yeah.
I mean, I know Bodhi very well, and and she's not somebody who gets overly emotional or weepy about anything. So that is testament to just how hard this hit.
Exactly. So that takes us to our first point here, Mara. This content hit us hard. So why did we get emotional over this? And I think the first thing we want to talk about are parasocial relationships and fandom. And why do we get so emotional over fictional characters? And I do want to read you something to kick this off, Mara, to see what you think about this. This is from a journal that I was reading.
Please
So
do.
let's kick this off. So psychologists call the types of relationships we form with fictional characters parasocial or one directional, because we know all about these characters, but they know nothing about us, right? The interesting thing is that our brains aren't really built to distinguish between whether a relationship is real or fictional. These friendships can convey a lot of real world benefits, including self-esteem boosts, decreased loneliness, more feelings of belonging, and so on. And when you spend quite a bit of time with the character, they really do become sort of a friend. So it's totally normal to develop strong emotions in regard to their stories. Anyone who has watched an engaging film or read an engaging novel knows we invest ourselves deeply in the experience of living with those characters. And we do tend to respond to them as though they're real individuals.
This is so interesting. Some of our listeners may also have heard about parasocial relationships in connection to content creators and social media, because it's actually also the case that if you follow a content creator and you get very invested in that content creator, you can talk about forming a parasocial relationship with that person because you are consuming their content, but it's this one-way relationship because you can never really, I mean, they're speaking to a broader audience, but you can never have any kind of one-on-one interaction with them. You can write comments and so on, but it can never really be like a real relationship where you have a reciprocal back and forth. So this is similar to that, but it's also not exactly the same thing because, as Bodhi read to us before, this is what happens whenever you immerse yourself in a piece of fiction. It's really an exercise in promoting empathy, which is why reading fiction or engaging with fiction in a film or game or whatever is so great for us as people. I actually feel like it is elevating because you become a more empathetic person when you engage with fiction and when you form these kinds of relationships to characters, simply by putting yourself in their shoes and learning to understand and empathize with a character who is perhaps very different from you.
Right.
But Also because, as Bodhi explained before, our brains don't always differentiate between what is a purely emotional experience and what is a lived experiential experience. What is something that you're actually doing in real life as opposed to something that you're just strongly imagining. The way that it impacts our brain is essentially the same way. So you do get the same brain activity as you might if you were actually face to face with a good friend.
I do want to bring this one other thing up here that from the same article is that kind of pertains to Arcann's story as well. So sometimes even characters that we did not initially like can redeem themselves. Writers often play with the notion of first impressions, which can be very strong, gradually building our sympathy for a person who at first repulsed us. It's not so much that we see these characters differently or that we misunderstood them earlier, but that we see the process that they go through, which allows them to go about revising our beliefs about them. Even if we cannot directly relate to a character's circumstances, we can still connect with them. So long as the storytelling and emotional perspectives are there, our ability to feel emotionally for fictional characters will transcend all the other circumstantial details. And yes, it may also be good for you. Feeling things, both good and bad, makes us feel alive.
Yes, exactly. And the more you do it, the better you become at it. It's the same thing as anything else. You train a particular part of your brain, you become better at doing that. And the same thing goes for empathy, which again is why this is actually morally elevating. I know that's a grand statement to make about fiction, especially when we're talking about a game, but I really mean that. I actually feel like this can have a really positive impact on you. And I think it's important to talk about because obviously we as gamers are positive towards games, but usually you hear about people spending a lot of time in front of a screen as a negative thing, and especially young people spending a lot of time in front of screens and games being a negative thing. But this speaks to the opposite being true, that it can actually also make you a better person, essentially. I don't think that's putting it too strongly.
I think that's a wonderful point, and I completely agree. And this is a great segue to talking about this game in particular, Star Wars: The Old Republic. Do you feel that this parasocial relationship and all the benefits that come from it is immensely enhanced due to the fact that we have even more choice in terms of our immersion within this universe? Because, we choose our characters, we choose how we look, sound, and even act because we have those choices in this Star Wars: Old Republic game. So aside from maybe, I don't know, virtual reality, I'm not sure there's many other ways to become more immersed in a story than in a game this type. What do you think, Mara?
I completely agree. And I did what I always do when I'm trying to understand something. I read a book about it. So
that sounds about right.
So as you said, Bodhi, we had all these feelings, and I was trying to understand why I felt this way. So I found a book that could, possibly explain myself.
That's about right.
And the book that I picked up is a book called How Games Move Us, Emotion by Design by author Catherine Isbester. And she actually writes about a game designed to evoke emotions, games designed to evoke emotions in us. And I'm going to highlight a couple of her key points in this book to explain why games in particular might make us feel something, even more so than other kinds of fiction that we consume through books or films, etc. And one of her key points is that because we make meaningful choices, as you said before, Bodhi, this is an RPG, SWTOR constantly prompts us to make a choice between light and dark, but also just actions in general as to how we want the story to play out. And the author of this book would call that a meaningful choice because it means that we as players feel a sense of responsibility for how the story plays out. And that in turn results in what she calls social emotions. And social emotions are the category of emotions that we only feel in a social situation, obviously. So emotions that we feel towards another person. So it could be something like guilt, for example. You typically only feel guilt if something you did impacted another living being. And that's also the case in this game. You might make a choice that has a negative impact on some of these characters. And because they're designed to make us feel something, you might actually feel a sense of responsibility and culpability and guilt. Or if it turns out that whatever you chose in game has a positive outcome, you might feel pride, you might feel joy on behalf of these characters. You might feel even gratitude or affection, all those positive social emotions that are always directed at somebody.
Mm.
And in
That's
addition,
so true.
I
I do the highs and the lows too. I'm like, this is I'm glad that this happened. I'm glad I chose this. And then I'm like, oh, I probably should have chosen, shouldn't have chosen that. That's kind of bad. Yeah.
That's exactly what she would mean by social emotion, what you just said. You feel bad. I mean, there's a sense of guilt and even regret that you might feel in any real life relationship too, right? Oh, I wish I hadn't said that. I didn't mean for that person to be hurt by what I did.
Except in real life, you can't escape out of the conversation.
That's true. It's one of the great benefits, just like how you can't space bar through a boring conversation in real life.
Oh my God. Great.
One of the other key points in this book is about avatars. She also argues that because we inhabit a protagonist, our avatar, our player character in a game, we have a much more visceral, sensory kind of experience than we do in most other kinds of fiction. And she actually cites a study where some scientists had a look at what goes on in the brain when you play a game where you take some kind of action, like running in a game, for example, as opposed to simply reading a novel about somebody who's running or watching a film about somebody who's running a race. And what they found is that the experience you have while running in a game is actually much more like what happens in the brain when you run in real life, as opposed to when you just watch a character run in those other kinds of fiction. So that's really interesting to me. That means that the brain interprets our gaming experience differently than how we interpret our experience when we engage with fiction in other kinds of media.
It also lends credence to the idea that you should probably go through the entire Star Wars Old Republic story yourself to create those types of bonds that you have with your character and all the choices you make, as opposed to watching something somebody else did on YouTube. Right?
That's such a good point. And I'm really glad you said that, because obviously on our YouTube channel, you will also find our video recordings of these particular scenes that we're going to talk about today. And I'm glad they're there, because it means that our listeners can go and quickly check some details that we talk about and see them for themselves if they haven't played this content. But let's just once again encourage everybody to go and experience this for yourselves, because all these studies that we've looked at, again, they point to the fact, and it is a scientific fact, your experience will be different if you play this in game as opposed to watching a recording. Which actually reminds me, and this is interesting to me too, I feel like there's a difference between me replaying these scenes on a character in game and simply watching even just my own recording of my own character. Even though it's my avatar, I feel slightly less impacted and immersed if I watch something and I know it's my recording, as opposed to when I'm actively controlling my character and clicking the dialogue option.
That's
do you feel the same way, Brody?
Yeah, I do actually. And I'm wondering if it boils down to the fact that when you're watching a static YouTube video, even if it's your previous playthrough, if the fact that your choice and control over the situation has been completely removed from it, and that in turn removes part of the investment that you have.
I think it is. I think it makes us react more like we would to watching a film, a very good film, but still not a film that gives us that visceral experience that we have when we actually inhabit our protagonist.
Well, I think when you're also playing, you're inherently focused in that moment. You're in the moment, you're present in the moment, playing through the story. Whereas if it's on YouTube, just a video, it could even be background material that's playing, right?
It's so interesting that you said that, because the author that I just talked about, Catherine Isbester, she would have loved that you pointed that out. And Bodhi hasn't read this book,
I
but this
haven't.
just shows that she has an intuitive understanding of what it's like to be a gamer and why it impacts us so much. Because another point that Isbister makes in the book is about the experience of flow. And I'm not going to go into what the whole theory of flow is right now, because we'll unpack it in another proclamation. But essentially, it is this theory that when you are deeply immersed in some kind of activity, and it can be any activity, it could be listening to music or playing a game or doing sport or dancing or whatever, you can get into the flow zone where it's almost like time and space just disappears and you're so completely in the zone. And she argues that is an experience that you very commonly have when you play games. If a game is well designed, it's designed to give you the flow experience.
Ah,
So that's probably what you find, Bodhi,
yeah.
when you feel completely immersed.
Yeah, you're
probably
totally
in the flow
engaged.
zone.
It's like
Mhm.
everything else fades out. You're just completely focused on the enjoying the content. Yeah.
Exactly. And what she says is that we tend to get into that zone when you have a perfect balance between feeling challenged. And of course, games always challenge us to some degree. If they don't challenge
Mhm.
us at all, it's a boring game, right? It's too easy.
Yeah.
You can multitask, you can listen to podcasts and you look at your second screen and whatever while you're just on autopilot, and that's not fun. So you have to have a balance between being challenged, but also being able to meet that challenge, because if it's too hard, we get frustrated and we rage quit, right?
Yeah.
So that's why good game design is essentially something that hits that sweet spot in between being too easy and too hard, and that's what puts us in the flow zone where we're fully immersed.
The second thing I wanted to mention in regard to emotions, why this story content hit us so hard, why did we get so emotional over this story update? And I came across something talking about happy tears. According to research from 2015, happy tears happen when you experience emotions so intense that they become unmanageable. When these emotions begin to overwhelm you, you might cry in order to help get these emotions out. Yeah, I know. I cried. I admit it. I cried a lot. And so again, trying to figure out what's going on here. So there's multiple types of happy tears that these scientists identified, but two really stood out to me. And those are affectionate tears and beauty tears. So first one here is affectionate tears. This type of positive tears often occurs when someone experiences an unexpected amount of kindness and exceptional love. The main feelings associated with this type of positive tears are warmth, communality, and compassion. So beauty tears, second one. This type of positive tears often occurs when something is perceived as overwhelmingly beautiful. This can include things such as natural wonders, experiencing a stunning music performance, or looking at a beautiful work of art. The main feeling associated with this type of positive tears is awe. So, Mara, for me, I think this was a combination of both things. It was affectionate and beauty tears, unexpected amount of happiness, exceptional love, feelings of love, warmth, and then couple that with something that was just overwhelmingly beautiful to us, and then harken back to the parasocial relationships. This is a character that we haven't seen in a very long time. We've been watching his journey and his growth over many, many years now, and we feel like we know this character now, and just to have this reunion scene, very, very impactful. So what do you think about those tier types? Is that even a thing? What do you think?
Absolutely, I think it is. And when you read that aloud about the beauty tiers, the first thing that came to my mind was actually when you and I went on a road trip and you took me to see the Grand Canyon the first time. And I felt tears in my eyes when I saw that. And I hadn't expected that, because I'm not a weepy person either. And I don't typically, as much as art moves me, because I'm very much the kind of person who is drawn to art, but I don't typically cry over art. So I was quite surprised actually that scenery made me cry the first time I saw the Grand Canyon. But I do find that just occasionally I'm taken aback by a piece of fiction that also makes tears come to my eyes. And it was the case for me with this content update. So I also felt, tears.
Yeah.
It's a mix of everything you said. It's partly that it was so good. It was everything we hoped for. And we're obviously going to unpack exactly why that was in the rest of the proclamation. So as just a piece of art, and I don't think that's putting it too strongly, this was a piece of art to me. I think it just worked really well. But it was definitely also that parasocial thing of just being so emotionally invested in this character and in this story, and also in our own character for such a long time that
That's
it just
yeah.
hit really
That's
hard.
the hit right there too, because I know that we previously disagreed on how we were going to play through the content on which characters and stuff.
Yes, we did.
But I did end up taking my very first character through the content. It hit extra hard. If you add in everything we discussed, like the parasocial relationship, the fact that this was a game where you can make these choices that led up to this point in the story, coupled with the fact that I've had this character essentially in my life for almost 12 years now. And then I've been making those choices over that entire time, watching this character's journey. And then, how many years now we known Arcann in the story as well? I mean, it's over 5 years, I'm
Yeah, it
guessing at
is.
this point.
Yeah.
So add all those things together, and you better believe you're gonna get some happy tears when
Yeah,
the scene
absolutely.
actually comes to fruition.
Yeah, and I think that that's such a good point, Bodhi, about your investment in your character over all these years. Because when we talk about emotional investment, we're not just talking about our emotional investment in Arcann, even though we definitely have that. We're talking about emotional investment in our avatar too. And if you listened to our previous proclamations, dear listeners, you know that Bodhi and I had a crisis before 7.3 came out. We could not decide what kind of character, what kind of playthrough to do first. Should it be somebody who was friends with Arcann, or should it be somebody who was in a romance with him? And I am the kind of person who always skips straight to dessert, as I admitted in the previous proclamation. So I always go to my romanced character first. And I did the same thing here, even though I think I might have actually ended up promising Bodhi that I wouldn't. I cheated and I took my romance character through first, after all.
Well, I gotta say, I think I really did make the right decision to take my main character, friend to Arcann through first, because it hit so hard just with him going through the story with Arcann, and it was super emotional. I even had to take a break before I even considered taking a romance tune through the story. But there was also that additional anticipation and excitement knowing that I had the whole romance arc to go through afterwards.
But I have to say, Bodhi, I think probably the reason why that was the right choice for you to take that character through first, who was friends with Arcann, is because I know that you are very invested in that particular character. I know that it's one of your first characters, and that he means a lot to you, actually.
Yeah.
So I think for you, that was the best way to play it the first time. But for me, the player character that I'm the most invested in is my Jedi Knight, who's in a romance with Arcann. She's the one that I write about. She's the one that I spend the most time building headcanons about and thinking about. If I were to commission fan art of any one of my characters, it would probably be her. So for me, it was the right choice in the end to skip straight to dessert and take her through, because my investment in her is almost on par with my investment in Arcann. So seeing those two characters together, that meant so much.
Okay, so Mara, this might be a good time to segue to the first part of our scene discussion. And we're going to break this into two parts, denoting them as reunion or the briefing scene, and then the romance scene with Arcann. So starting with the reunion discussion, let's talk about our first impressions and our overall reunion with Arcann, and how thrilling this very moment was. Let's talk about the actual body language, reactions, and go from there.
So we walk in the door, we're in Voskar, and the camera is behind our character, and she turns a corner and we see Arcann standing there. How did you feel in that moment, Bodhi?
I knew it, that they did such a great job with the buildup, because my character's back kept blocking Arcann until the very last second. I was like,
Yes.
oh my God, this is happening. There he is.
He has his back turned to us, and then he turns around. And it's just, we've talked about this in previous proclamations. it makes us feel nostalgia for all the other times we've approached Arcann in the same way in crucial scenes where his back has been turned and then he turns around and faces our character. It might seem like a small thing, but the fact that it makes us think about all those previous moments just brings back the whole long history we've had with him.
Mm-hmm. And we're talking back to like KOTET days, back when during his dark times when he did that slow turnaround stuff.
Yeah.
It's just always, it's been omnipresent for this character, and it was just wonderful to have that kick things off for this scene.
It was. And then, of course, there's the fact that if you are in a romance with him, he turns around and he smiles at our character. And he only smiles at a romanced character. If you approach him with somebody who's just a friend, he turns around with a very serious look on his face. And that's something we actually also talked about when we were talking about our predictions for 7.3. We actually said we really hope that he does smile if you're in a relationship with him, but we don't really see him doing that unless he's looking at the person that he loves. It was exactly what I wanted. I'm not going to lie. I'm not a savvy person either, but I had that in my, I don't even think I actually said it out loud to you, Bodhi, or in our proclamations previously, because I almost probably felt slightly ashamed of how sappy it was, but I really wanted her to just run and jump into his arms, and she did.
And it was just nice. It was just a nice brief kiss, which is always up to my standards.
It was a very soft kiss, followed
nice.
by a moment of gazing into each other's eyes, which was very nice.
And then, of course, it was quickly followed up with the down to business and consummate professional side of both of them, which I loved too.
Mm-hmm.
There's just like a profound brief moment between the two of them reuniting after who knows how long that was, but
we still don't know.
We don't know, but it was super, super impactful. But we should take a moment here, Mara, to discuss the different things that he can say to us initially.
Yeah,
so
let's do it.
Should we start with the bad the bad non-romanced thing that you can say?
Let's get the cruel option out of the way.
To be honest, I don't remember the actual thing that our character can say to him. It was just basically like, what information did you bring me, essentially, right? That's the
it's very cold.
Yeah, that's the first thing you say to him is, where's my information? What are you doing back, basically? And so Arcann responds with this. And to this response, I give you 10 out of 10 clapping support of you, Arcann, for saying this in response. Here it is.
You made it very clear that I would not be welcome empty-handed. I would not have returned otherwise.
I love that response from him. And it's important that we mention here that he will only say that if, in digging deeper, when he calls you from the planet in wild space on his quest and requests help, if you then refuse to help him and you tell him dialogue option number 3, don't bother coming back unless you succeed on your mission. It's only if you pick that dialogue option that he will respond to you this way in 7.3.
It's a huge step or leap, in my opinion, for the character of Arcann if we're talking about the concepts that we discussed in Proclamation 2, consequences, where Mara and I were discussing what we hoped for the characters of Arcann and Senya if our player characters continue to treat them in terrible ways and, you know, make terrible decisions in front of them, which would possibly include them leaving the Alliance. But this is a great first step to try to push back. Maybe it's just becoming more and more apparent to the character that this is just unacceptable behavior.
I think so too. He does sound fed up when he says that. And
let me play it one more time.
You made it very clear that I would not be welcome empty-handed. I would not have returned otherwise.
I mean, to me, that sounds like he's had enough at this point. And it's very rare for Arcann to take that tone with the player character, regardless of how you treat him. You can say the most atrocious things to him coming up to this point. And this is, to me, the most fed up he has actually sounded with a commander who treats him cruelly.
But anyway, that's a huge thing that we took away from this as a possible thing that Arcann would say to the player character when you first reunite again. Let's go to one of the other responses, the one that I got as a player character who sent Sonore to assist him.
You were wise to send Sonore to help me. Without her, I might still be searching those ruins. But together we found something.
The first thing that I think about Mara, I'm not sure what you're going to say, but is that it's the first thing he would say would be a very nice compliment.
Yeah, praising our character's wisdom, which is
That-
also something that he does in Unmasked Regret, where he also mentions our character's wisdom.
Right.
So I like that very much.
That's also the one you got, though, right?
Yes, it is,
You were
because
wise
my
to send me.
character, who is in a romance with him, also sent Sanare.
Let's go ahead and play the other responses here when he greets you again.
I swore to you, I would do whatever it takes to return to you. Every day I remembered how much faith you have in me. It meant everything. I did everything in my power to return.
So this is what he says if you were in a romance with him, but you did not send Sanare, which is interesting.
Yeah, the fact that he's, again, reminiscing about how much our belief or our player character's belief in him sustained him throughout his quest. I love the sentiment here, but
yeah. And you actually said to me, Bodhi, before we started recording, that you find this one more romantic than the other option. And I have to agree with you. It is. It's nice to hear that he was sustained by our character's faith in him. On the other hand, I do feel like he sounds very confident in the first line when he says, I'm glad you sent Sanare. We did something together. I like the idea of Arcann finding that he can do something with the help of somebody else, and that is strength and not weakness, calling on the support of a friend.
Yeah, that makes us go back and forth for us. We've had this discussion between the two of us this past week, but we want to make sure we're sending Arcann with the support that he wants and asks for, because it is such a big step. But at the same time, is it more valuable in a way to assure him that your belief in him is sustaining enough, because we know that he can get the job done, and he does get the job done by himself. And he says these kind words like, thank you for believing in me. So it's a toss-up, because you do want the character to be comfortable asking for help. It's a big step for someone like him.
Yeah. I feel like for me, both outcomes result in a really important lesson for Arcann. And I'm not sure that I could really say that one is more important or more valuable than the other. I feel like if we do send Sanare, he discovers the value of doing something together. And I feel like that ties in really well with his growing empathy for others, which is such an important step in his redemption arc. But on the other hand, if we don't send her, he finds that having just one person's belief and faith in him is enough for him to overcome an obstacle on his own, which is also a really important lesson for a character who's been so alone and who's struggled with Valkorian's complete lack of affection and belief in him for all of his life. So I think for me, the key takeaway is that Arcann is now able to turn either of these two scenarios into a positive lesson or conclusion. And for me, that just speaks volumes about his growth as a character and about his resilience.
And Mara, do you have anything to say about the beginning of this first sentence he says here? The word swore. Listen to this.
I swore to you, I would do whatever it takes to return to you.
Well, first of all, I'm immensely interested in finding out how you actually get him to say that, because I have not been able to get him to say that line with any of my characters, no matter what my choices were. So if anybody knows how to get him to say that, please let us know in the comment, because I'm dying to know. But I also find it interesting that he talks about swearing, because we've spoken about Arcann making vows and oaths of fealty. So swearing to return to our character is completely in line with that, I think.
I knew you were going to pick up that immediately. I love it. These are such great lines.
Yeah, they are.
Great lines. One last one here that we want to use as a segue to another wonderful point that we picked up on is one of the second or third things that he might mention immediately after reuniting is this.
I'm so glad to be home.
It's just a very, very, very short sentence, but to me, it really stood out.
Yeah, it means so much.
Let's talk for a second about home and the fact that he says this to our player character while they're on Voss, but clearly Voss is not the home that he's referring to. He's referring to our player character. I've got one thing to read to you, Mara, and I want to get your take on this.
All right.
For all people, home is the center of the world and a place of order that contrasts with the chaos elsewhere. Home is the place where you feel in control and properly oriented in space and time. It is a predictable and secure place. In short, home is the primary connection between you and the rest of the world.
That is amazing. And that's exactly what I would have also said if you had asked me to define what home is. And this is one of my favorite topics, actually. I love talking about the concept of home. It's something that I've studied a lot and written about a lot. And Bodhi, you might have to cut me off here if I start going on about it for too long, because we want to do a whole proclamation about the concept of home at a later point.
This is a big thread we're pulling here. Yep.
Yes, it is. Because I find Arcann a really interesting character when it comes to the concept of home. This is somebody who's grown up in a homely setting that probably wasn't all that homely. In the palace of the Eternal Dragon probably was not a particularly safe or cozy space for Arcann the way that most of our childhood homes were for us. So as you said, it's really impactful that he's referring to a person and not a place as his home in this line. I completely agree that home is the ultimate shelter. It's the ultimate place of security. And I also think that home is the place where you can be your most authentic self. It's where you can take off the mask, so to speak.
Wow. Yes.
And, put aside the role and the facade that you put up anywhere else. And I think anybody can recognize this if you think about your regular day-to-day life. When you're most yourself, you're at home, right? You are not quite your entire self. When you go to work, you put on your professional mask. If you go to somebody else's home, you adjust to that social context. But when you're in your own home, that's where you really just let yourself be who you are, and you are at your most relaxed, your most casual. And in a way, you're most vulnerable, but only because you feel so completely safe. Presumably also with the people that you share a home with, at least if we're talking about an idyllic, positive home, of course. And that's the last point that I wanted to make about the concept of home in this proclamation. That
it's a teaser. Yep.
This is a teaser. That homely space, which in German would be heimlich, is the opposite of das Unheimliche, which Sigmund Freud, the very famous psychologist, talks about in his essay about horror and creepy feelings. He calls that kind of creepiness that you get from a certain type of horror fiction, das Unheimliche, the unhomely. So he says a certain type of fright is the opposite of the feeling that you have in the safe, secure, idyllic home. And this is really interesting to me because Freud also defines unhomely or uncanny space as a kind of space that is unstable, where time and space is not predictable. And he also defines it as a kind of space where whatever is repressed, something that you don't like to think about, it could be a past event that you've just tried your best to forget about, resurfaces in the present. And that to me is very close to what Arcann actually talks about, as really here in a moment when he describes his experience in Darthnall's ruins. So we have a juxtaposition here of the perfect idyllic homely space embodied by our character, Arcann, and then this unhomely, uncanny space that he's occupied for an unknown duration of time on the planet in wild space.
Great takeaway. I can't wait for that proclamation. We're going to have a blast.
Me too. Yeah.
It's going to be pulling that thread's going to be amazing.
Yep.
I do want to move on to another topic, but briefly, can we just take a second to acknowledge the fact that the designers of the scene, I'm not sure what you would call them, the devs that worked on the crafting of the scene itself, after reuniting, Arcann and our player character put on these epic power poses right next to one another at the briefing table, and the camera like holds on them in this amazing epic pose for maybe like 2 seconds longer than what you would expect. It was just super profound. I'm like, yes, this is the moment I've been wanting for such a long time. Great characters reunited at last. The duo is complete. Let's go.
Yeah, it was just the perfect balance between intimacy and professionalism. Because as you said before, these are characters that tend to be consummate professionals when they're in a setting where they're discussing a mission. So they have those power poses. But at the same time, they're stood there side by side. There's a moment where they look at each other and you can see the connection between them.
Yes. Reunited at last.
Yes.
I love that moment. I just wanted to briefly bring that up really quickly. So let's use these 2 next sound clips to segue into our next topic. This is basically Arcann summarizing what he brought back from his quest.
Sharing this knowledge was unacceptable to those around Darth Null. She was ostracized, friendless. But Darth Null was careless. She made contact with someone she shouldn't have, the Sith Emperor, as he was then. He took advantage of her mistake. He ruthlessly pursued her.
Okay, first thing for me, Mara, I gotta tell you this. Do you notice the way that Eric Dellums said as he was then? I don't know if that was intentional or not, but Arkann's referring to the fact that it was vitiate at that time, right? I always love hearing Arcann acknowledge the fact that he knows at this point that Valkorion, was basically offshoot of the same person, vitiate, tenebrae, etc. But I love hearing him acknowledge that fact. And when he says as he was then, it kind of has a little bit of a bite to it.
Absolutely. And I think it makes me think about what I was saying just before about the uncanny and das Unheimliche, because obviously your parent is also supposed to be somebody who's safe. And imagine how creepy it is. It's scary beyond belief to think of your parent being a completely different person than you thought that they were. And I mean, you can't really take it to more of an extreme than Tenebrae, vitiate, Valkorion, who's not just a different person from who Arcann thought he was, but who is an immortal being of immense evil, who's had so many different faces and so many different lives. It must be beyond terrifying for Arcann to have this realization.
Especially he's had a lot of time now to digest this fact, right? Since the big moment in the throne room when our player character essentially leads Arcann to understand that this is the Sith Emperor as well, which is how they knew him at the time. Must have been so much to take in then, but even now he's had this much time to digest that fact, and it's still a thing.
Yeah, and I completely agree with what you said before, that it's great to hear him actually acknowledge that out loud, because that's a conversation that you and I have had before when we played KOTET and KOTET. To what extent does he realize exactly what his father is? We can infer certain things about it because of his nonverbal communication and facial expressions, but it's very rare for us to actually hear Arcann talk about that.
Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I loved all these lines. It was phenomenal. And before we segue to the next point, I do want to say that I adore the fact, and I was flipping out over the fact that we did get the scene that we wanted. Not only did we get a scene with Sonoray and Arcann, but we also have evidence littered throughout the scene itself in the environment around them that indicates that they had been doing extensive research together, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I love the way that everything in this scene is presented. The table that we're standing by in this scene is littered with books and notes and data pads. And that's something else that we talked about after we played it, that books are actually fairly rare in the Star Wars universe, paper books, that is. And I'm just guessing here. I don't have a source for this, but I'm guessing that because we know that Voss is not as technologically advanced as other Star Wars civilizations, maybe that's why they tend to have more paper books, which I just thought was a nice touch. If that is in fact the case, that paper is more common on Voss, it's a nice touch to have all those books scattered there. and also just to see how they've done all this research together, as you said.
I
I also
loved
wanted
it.
to mention really briefly about the clip that you played before, that if you don't have Arcann in this scene because you are a monster and you killed him,
Yeah.
or or because you just skipped KOTET on an Imperial character and he was automatically killed in your game, you obviously just have Sana Ray conveying this information to you. And even though the information that you get is essentially the same, the lines are not exactly the same. Arcann uses
Right.
phrasing that Sana Ray doesn't use. He
Mhm.
uses the word ruthlessly. He says that Vitiate ruthlessly pursued Darth Nul. He says that Vitiate took advantage of Darth Nul. And that kind of vocabulary, to me, is just, it's great characterization, because you can tell that the resentment that Arcann always carried towards Valkorion is still there, that he's still thinking about this horribly manipulative being that always just schemed and was a puppeteer and twisted everybody.
Mhm.
And Sana Ray has a much more neutral tone when she conveys the same facts.
The playthrough without Arcann on a character that didn't have Arcann was absolutely soulless, dead inside.
Yeah,
Compared
it really
to
is.
Arcann and what he brings to this, his story in general. It just brings so much to this world, and I couldn't stand the scene without Arcann in it.
I agree. And obviously we're biased. I think everybody knows that.
Yes.
But in this particular case, I'm pretty sure that even if I wasn't that emotionally invested in Arcann, even if he wasn't one of my favorite characters, I'm pretty sure I'd still feel like, yeah, this scene is subpar without him in it, because you can kind of tell that it's designed to have him there, because, I mean, let's be honest, this is Arkann's scene. And in a way, this is even his update, I think.
Mm-hmm. I concur. And what a great segue. Great job, Mara. Let's
Completely unintentional.
Let's now talk about returning with the elixir. So how well did we do, Mara? Did we predict this aspect of Arkann's return? And is Arcann the hero of this story update? What are your thoughts?
I'm so glad you asked me that, because that would be a resounding yes. I believe Arcann is the hero of this update. And before I get into explaining why I think that is, I want to just briefly remind our listeners what we mean when we talk about returning with the elixir. Because if you haven't heard our previous proclamations, you might think, what are they talking about? What potion? He didn't bring a potion. So the returning with the elixir is a phrase from Joseph Campbell's monomyth, which is a structure in narratology that shows fundamental stages or archetypal structures in storytelling and myths from a variety of regions throughout history. So the idea is that there is this one story that every hero goes through, and obviously it'll play out slightly differently. But Joseph Campbell argues that you can create a monomyth, a single myth that shows the essential steps for all of these heroes and all of the different stages that they go through on their journey. And returning with the elixir signifies the successful return of the hero to his world, carrying the elixir, which is not necessarily an actual elixir or potion, but whatever it is he needs to bring back to heal the world. So, having very briefly explained that, what I'd like to talk about now is why I think that Arcann does take on the role of hero in this update, because he actually goes through those stages in the hero's journey or the monomyth. So first of all, I'd like to briefly read aloud a definition of a hero as defined by Joseph Campbell and other people who write Campbellian theory. And this particular quote is by Stuart Voitila from his book Myth and the Movies. And I'm quoting, "The hero is our protagonist or central character whose primary purpose is to separate from the ordinary world and sacrifice himself for the service of the journey at hand, to answer the challenge, complete the quest, and restore the ordinary world's balance. The hero's journey may be a challenge of personal growth, to win a competition, to heal a wound, or to find love. Heroes may also need to answer calls to adventure where physical lives or even the fate of the world are at stake. These heroes must learn to accept the sacrifice of life and limb for the service of others.
That's
So
amazing.
I'm sure you noticed, Bodhi, there's a bunch of words in this quote that we
Mhm.
obviously associate with Arcann, namely the word sacrifice.
Mhm.
I think I don't think we're reading something into this if we say that it's definitely the case that Arcann has reached a point in his redemption arc where he's thinking of sacrifice in a different way. He's willing to sacrifice something for his community and for the Alliance. So it's no longer the kind of sacrifice that we saw him try to make without success back when he had internalized Valkorian's teachings. A man can have everything if he is willing to sacrifice. Back then, it was more of a transaction where he had been taught if only you give and give and give, you will eventually receive something back. So it's like the transaction between a person and a god. Basically, you give something to that god hoping to get some kind of boon back, except
Yeah.
because Valkorian is who he is. Arcann never got the reward, no matter what he gave.
But he made the sacrifice. His
even though he
arm,
made the
his
sacrifice.
face, sex.
Yeah,
Yep.
sacrifice of life and limb. But now it's a different kind of sacrifice where it's not really about a transaction, giving something to get something. It's more about giving something because you are so fully invested in actually healing the world and doing your part to make the world a better place, which I think is what has made Arcann step into the role of a hero at this point. He's doing it for the service of others, not for himself, so to speak. So, having briefly defined what a hero is in this theoretical framework, I'm going to go through some of the stages of the monomyth. And this is another thing that we want to unpack in a future proclamation because there's so much we could say
Oh,
about
this
the
is a big
monomyth.
thread. This is a big thread.
This is
Yeah.
a big thread. And actually, this thread might even unravel into several different threads.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, you could make a monomyth for multiple characters in the story. We've talked about
And we
possibly... We should do one for Senya.
Oh,
We should
yes.
discuss how our character perhaps goes through her or his own monomyth in KOTET and KOTET. But for this particular proclamation, I just want to highlight a couple of the stages. There are 17 stages in the monomyth, but it's sometimes reduced to just 11 and sometimes 9. And I want to just pick and choose a couple because we only have a limited amount of time to talk about this. And my purpose in doing this is simply to show how the mission that Arcann went on to the planet in wild space really is a hero's journey. So the first stage in the monomyth or the hero's journey is the call to adventure. And this is the stage that gets the story rolling by disrupting the hero's ordinary life. So there's some kind of challenge or quest that must be undertaken. And it throws this ordinary world off balance by making it very clear that the hero needs to take action in order to essentially stop the world from falling apart. And obviously what throws our ordinary world out of balance in this storyline is the existence of Darth Nul and her relics, also the existence of Harakol and Malgus, everything that's going on, essentially. Somebody has to take action. So the call to adventure in this case would be the information that we get from Task Force Nova saying we've located the origin of this planet, and then Sana Ray saying let's send Arcann, which is something that happens in whispers in the Force, of course. The next stage is called refusal of the call, where the hero normally refuses the call to adventure because he has fears or insecurities that resurface and he's not quite willing to undertake this journey.
Yeah.
That's the case for Arcann. At least we don't see that. If that happens, it's something that happens behind the scenes. But what can happen in some stories is that the hero can actually be so willing to go on his quest that he doesn't refuse the call, and instead it's his allies that express fears of the risks involved. And we do see that in Whispers in the Force. I remember Theron in my playthrough on my Republic character saying, is it really a good idea to send Arcann? The Jedi might not be too happy about this because he did nearly wipe them out. So Theron sort of becomes the voice of this refusal of the call. And if you play an Imperial character, it's somebody else voicing the fears and insecurities about sending Arcann on the quest. Can you remember her name, Brody? The Imperial lady?
It's Admiral Ago's replacement, Pardax, I think. Commodore Pardax, I think her name is. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
She says the same kind of thing, but I think she might have said it. She might have mentioned like former tyrant or something when she mentions that in the conversation. So, oof.
Yeah. So in a way, what Joseph Campbell would say is that these characters, Pardax or Theron, they function as kind of threshold guardians, which are the archetypal characters that make it difficult to cross the threshold from the ordinary world onto this world of adventure, because they always express any kind of fear or insecurity associated with the hero starting this quest. So if it was a fairy tale, it might be some kind of beast or ogre or something guarding the boundary between the village and the scary forest or something. But here it's actually our allies just voicing these fears. The next stage is called meeting the mentor. The hero always needs a mentor, and we know this as Star Wars fans. We know there's always a mentor character. We know that Luke needs Obi-Wan to be his mentor, who can give him the advice and the guidance that he needs to start his quest. And actually, it's the same case for Arcann here, which is something that I love, that Arcann now has a mentor who is not a completely twisted mentor like Valkorion, but somebody who actually gives him the guidance he needs. And this mentor is, of course, Sana Ray, who helps him understand what is happening to him on this journey. We'll hear him talking about that in a minute, but who's also the one that actually sends him. She's the one that says to the commander, we should send Arcann. He's the right choice for this.
And here's why.
Yeah. So Sana Ray actually takes on two archetypal roles in the storyline. She is the mentor character, as I said, but she's also the archetypal herald. And the herald in the monomyth is the person who makes the call to adventure, who says there's something here that needs to be fixed, and this is how we do it. So that's also her role. It's also interesting that we learn that Sana Ray goes to speak with Arcann before he sets out on his journey. We don't see that. It happens behind the scenes, but she says at the end of Whispers in the Force, I will go and talk to him to prepare him for his journey. So she's very obviously acting out her role as a mentor by making sure he has what he needs. The rest of this adventure obviously is not something that we see, because we don't follow Arcann on his quest, sadly, to the planet in wild space. Some of us are hoping to cover this in fan fiction, but we can infer a lot about what happens. We know that he does get to stage 4 of the monomyth, which is crossing the threshold. Again, the threshold is the boundary between the ordinary world, in this case, the Alliance, Nordesen, the planets that we know, and the unknown world of adventure, which is obviously this dark planet in wild space. We do receive a letter from Arcann where he talks about being close to Soule, which to me indicates that he does go through this stage in the monomyth of crossing the threshold, where the hero typically has to confront some kind of event that forces him to commit to his quest, while at the same time challenging him and making him face up to a fear or something from his past.
From the past, yeah.
Exactly. So once he successfully crossed this threshold and he is actually in the world of adventure, in this case on the planet, the hero has to go through a stage called Tests, Allies, and Enemies, which is where he, of course, encounters people in this world of adventures, overcomes various challenges and tests and so on. We now know what some of that entailed for Arcann, because he tells us after he returns, but of course we didn't actually see it happen, aside from the little flashback that we get where we do see some of the events that took place in the distant past on this planet. We don't see Arcann and Sana Ray, but we see Darth Nul and her followers, but we can infer that Arcann also either saw this in a vision or at least learned about it, because that's the knowledge that they bring back. And he also tells us about the feelings that he had, the personal struggles that he had on the world while he was searching alone. The next stage that I'm going to highlight, again, there are more stages in between, but I'm just picking a couple that I think are the most clear from what he tells us. is called Approach to the Innermost Cave, or sometimes in some versions of the monomyth, it's called The Belly of the Whale, or even the Abyss. So this is at the very bottom, at the southernmost part of the monomyth, which is always depicted as a circle. The hero has to go into his biggest ordeal, and usually he physically goes into something. It can be a cave, or it can be a house, or some kind of enclosure. And of course, in this case, we have Darth Nul's ruins, which symbolize Arcann's ordeal, because that's what he has to get into, and it's what he can't get into. When he calls us in Digging Deeper, he says, okay, this is where I have my biggest challenge. There is a force energy keeping me from entering here. So he's been tested up until this point, but this is the real crisis where he has to face his greatest fear. And we learn that his greatest fear in this case is that he might be destined to walk in his father's footsteps. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that when we hear the sound clip in a moment. But in the description of the hero's journey, it says that the hero often experiences a life or death crisis in this stage. He confronts his most difficult challenge, and he experiences death in a symbolic way. He teeters on the brink of failure. He may directly taste death, or he may witness the death of an ally or a mentor, or worse, he may fear that he is a direct cause of someone's death.
Wow.
Do you see how well this fits, Bodhi?
It's perfect. This is going to be amazing thread to tease out.
Yeah, it really is.
Several proclamations. I love this.
This is exactly what Arcann tells us that he faced at this point on his quest. He was afraid that he was destined to cause death and destruction, just like Valkorion, and that was the reason why he saw the ruins. And interestingly enough, another stage in the monomyth is actually called, you won't believe this, Bodhi, Atonement with the Father.
What?
And this is the stage of the hero's journey where the hero meets the figure of a fearsome father god figure. It can be an actual father figure, an actual parental figure, or it can be a god, or it can be something in the hero's life that represents paternal authority. But in this case, of course, it's actually just his father. It's Valkorion or Vitiate. And in order to get past this stage on his journey, the hero must either overcome or reconcile himself with this father figure. So this is something that we can talk much more about in future proclamations, but for Arcann to progress at all, there has to be some kind of acceptance here. And I feel like we do hear that, because he realizes that his visions were not, in fact, an indication that he is destined to become his father. They meant something completely different. In fact, they meant that he has the opportunity to atone and become his own person, somebody who is a complete contrast to everything that Valkorion stood for. Finally, and I'm skipping past some stages again to get to the end of this, but finally the hero obviously survives death. He overcomes his greatest fear. If it was a fairy tale, he would have slain the dragon or whatever it was he had to do. In this case, Arcann has reached the ruins, possibly on his own or possibly with the help of Sana-Ray, which brings him to the stage where he gets his reward. And the reward is, of course, whatever it was he sought within the belly of the whale or in the innermost cave. And in this case, what he sought, of course, was knowledge of Darth Nul, which he finds and brings back. So that brings him to the stage called the Road Back, or the Return. There's also a stage in the monomyth here called Resurrection, where the hero experiences a kind of rebirth, which I find really relevant to point out in Arkann's case, because obviously not only is there a physical return and a reunion with our character, but I would argue that there's also a sense of rebirth. Firstly, because he re-experiences some of the visions that he had when he was reborn on Voss during the healing ritual. So there's a kind of resurgence of that rebirth, a reminder of the things that he experienced back then, but with an increased understanding which I would argue in a way results in a kind of second, rebirth for him. He's moved on to a new stage of being at this point. And then finally, there's the return with the elixir. Again, the elixir is the knowledge that he has brought back. We don't learn exactly what it is. It's not like a physical, tangible object. It's, I assume, everything that he and potentially Sanare found in the ruins. We see the hollow on the meeting table. Sanare shows us multiple different things. Some of them look a little bit like they could be maybe holocrons or data pads. Arcann also mentioned that there were strange markings in a language that he couldn't understand. So maybe they managed to translate these markings, and that's where they got the knowledge. Regardless, the knowledge that they brought back is the elixir.
And this is the clip itself. Here, let me play this.
Yeah, please
It
do.
took more time than I cared to admit, but I finally found another way inside. That's why I found this.
So the fact that he says this,
Yeah,
in this case, makes me think that he actually did bring something like a repository of knowledge back. Maybe
I think so
something
too.
showed up in the hollow thing on the table, but it's never explicitly stated. So bare minimum, we just know that he brought knowledge back. So
the knowledge that we needed to understand essential parts of this puzzle about Darth Nul. And Joseph Campbell says that the hero needs to bring something back to heal a physical or emotional wound or accomplish some kind of task in the ordinary world. And that's exactly what happens here, of course. We learn things about Darth Nul that we didn't know before. I would argue that this does push the plot forwards. I know that that is a criticism that some people might have, that not enough happens in update 7.3 to actually move the plot forward. I feel like what Arcann brings back is really important. We learn her actual name. We learn key information about her past. We clear up some misunderstandings about who Darth Nul was. And Sanare also says, if Malgus hoped to keep this hidden from us, he has failed because they managed to bring back this information. So finally, Joseph Campbell would say that the elixir brings closure to the journey and it restores balance, but it can also pose some questions and ambiguities. That means this is not just over. It could be that returning with the elixir completes a cycle of this particular journey, but that it also opens up the opportunity for new adventures. And obviously, I hope that that's the case here, that Arcann will continue to play a part in the Darth Nul and Malgus plot.
As he mentions in the next scene that we're going to discuss as well. I really hope that he does play a big role in this. I'm very, very excited to see where this goes. I loved just pulling upon this thread for the amount of time we spent talking about it. It's amazing and great finds.
I love talking about the hero's journey. I feel like it's a great conceptual tool for making it really clear why a story works when it works.
Right.
Because that's exactly what Joseph Campbell's point was, that when a story really grabs us, it's because we recognize this archetypal structure of a hero going through these stages. So we talked in the beginning of this proclamation about why we are so immersed in Arcann's story. And I feel like this is just yet another thing that we can point to as a reason why we're so immersed in this and why we just feel like the story works on every single level.
That's so true. Mara, I have one thing I want to play for you. One of the last things that can actually happen as a result of one of our decisions. At the end of this reunion scene or the briefing scene, however you want to say it, when Sanare tells our player character that he or she won't have an audience with the three without doing more, essentially, I believe your character can say something along the lines of, I single-handedly saved this planet. They kind of owe me. And one of the response that Arcann interjects is very interesting. And I know that you love this. So let's play this really quickly. This is what Arcann says.
My sister nearly destroyed this world because of me. I should be the one to make amends.
Yeah.
What do you have to say about that?
I find it really interesting that he only says that if our character is, kind of acting a bit douchey and saying, why do I have to do anything for the three? I've already done enough.
Yeah.
And I find it interesting that when Arkann takes responsibility for something and expresses regret and sorrow over something, it's typically when the player character who ought to be the hero of the story does not behave like the hero, right?
Mhm.
Because that's not how a hero responds to the call to adventure. And this is another
Yes.
call to adventure, having to go and do tasks on boss in order to get this audience with the three. So if our player character refuses that call, Arkann actually accepts it and
Mhm.
says,
Steps
well,
up.
I should be the one. Yeah, he steps up and says, okay, well, I should be the one to take on the role as the hero, figuratively speaking here, and make amends.
It's a great scene. And it does speak volumes to Arkann's character. I think it's a great scene. Although I never I didn't really know about it until I did some escaping onto some scenes, because I would never have chosen that option. But just briefly wanted to touch on that. So I think it's time for us to segue to the big reveal of the story. So we refer to this as the revelation. Let's go ahead and play the clip.
All this talk of visions, it reminded me. Something strange happened while I was away. As I searched Darth Maul's ruins, every step I took felt so familiar, like I had been there before. It was confusing, distressingly so. I was so certain I had stood on the surface of that empty world, even though I could not remember when or why. I spoke with Soule about this sense of familiarity. It didn't take long before she understood what I was feeling. I was there, in those ruins, once before, during the ritual in the Shrine of Healing. This realization awakened other memories of what I saw while the Voss healed me. I believed they were dreams at the time, but Soule believes otherwise. She says they were visions. In the ritual, the mystics infuse part of their spirit with yours. It is not uncommon for a mystic's gifts to be shared with the one they are cleansing. They open my mind to unreachable distances. The past. What may happen. What never will. In truth, it is all still a blur. It was as if I lived decades in the span of hours.
So that's it. The revelation. Arkann's been infused with the gift of visions during his cleansing ceremony on Voss. And what does this mean to us, Mara? What does this mean?
It means so much. And the reason it means so much is because it fills so many gaps in our understanding of Arkann's character and his journey. First of all, it's the first time that we learn exactly what he's actually been through from his point of view during the Voss healing ritual. And everything that you and I have discussed before about the healing ritual, where we've tried to argue why we strongly believe that he was not magically fixed or cleansed, or worst of all, this is the worst take I've heard, brainwashed into being, a quote unquote, a good person, is just, confirmed by this. That is absolutely not what happened. Also, it makes us understand on a different level why Arkann took the actions that he did after the healing ritual on Voss. I think it goes a long way to explain why he joins our character in the Dragon's Maw chapter. Clearly something's been happening behind the scenes there. Clearly he's had a massive change in perspective. And one of the ways that we can see that is because he walks up to our character and he says, my destiny is to join the Alliance. And this is from a character who has previously killed Lord of the Science for saying that he was fated to fall, and who has said over and over again, I choose my own destiny. And now he's suddenly saying, okay, this is actually my destiny, to join my former enemy. So obviously something led to him completely changing his thinking. And now we know what it was. It was probably the fact that he had these visions. Even though he didn't perceive them as visions at the time, he perceived them as dreams. I'm sure that at least on a subconscious level, there was something there that made him look at our character in a different way.
And for me, this changes everything, especially the way that I'm going to perceive future playthroughs of KOTET going forward as well, which we still, Mara, we need to do together.
Oh yeah.
since this update came out, because it's extremely interesting to
Mhm.
see what the character of Arcann might be thinking from KOTET, Wrath and Ruin chapter 1 KOTET going forward,
Yeah.
especially as he approaches our character for the first time as a changed person in the Dragon's Maw chapter.
Yeah.
It's immensely powerful, and this blew me away.
Yeah.
Blew me away.
And he seems so radically changed, right? And that's something else that I remember back when the chapters came out, that I mean, we loved it and we always did. But I know that some people felt that the change was almost too sudden. And I think they felt a little bit like, okay, we don't quite know who he is now. How do we relate to him now? And I think that what we learned in 7.3 just really, again, goes a long way to explain why he's changed so much in the relatively short amount of time that he's been gone, where, we haven't seen what he's been doing, but now we know that he's obviously been digesting this new outlook after the boss healing. So yeah, that really goes a long way to explain exactly what he's been through.
I do want to briefly read some of the codex entries in regard to the Shrine of Healing specifically for you, and see what you think on this, because this means a lot, especially after the big revelation here.
Yeah.
So this is from the Shrine of Healing codex entry. While many visitors to Voss seek guidance from the mystic visionaries, a few desperate pilgrims come to risk the treacherous road to the Shrine of Healing. Imposing and ancient, the shrine houses the mystic healers, whose incredible curative abilities are said to knit bones, purge disease, and mend the mind and spirit. So I'm going to segue quickly over to the pilgrimage to the Shrine of Healing codex entry. Before they can petition the healers, however, those seeking aid must embark on a dangerous and arduous pilgrimage to the shrine's remote location. The journey is more than merely symbolic. Facing the trials of the pilgrimage purifies the spirit of the petitioner, an essential requirement, the Voss say, for those seeking aid. Voss healing rituals disperse an affliction across multiple individuals, diluting it until it no longer has any ill effects. If the ritual is performed on one who has not been purified, the mystics believe that there's a chance the malady will instead infect all involved in the ritual, making the necessity of the pilgrimage readily apparent. So, talking about the pilgrimage itself, the embarking on a dangerous and arduous pilgrimage to the shrine's remote location, which in turn is said to purify the spirit of the petitioner. Who would that be, Mara? Who would be the petitioner in this case?
Yeah. Well, obviously it would be Senya.
Yeah.
Because Arcann is essentially unconscious. He's very severely wounded. So it's clearly not him embarking on a journey of pilgrimage. But I think we could easily argue that Senya does embark on such a journey, because we know that she goes multiple other places before she takes him to the Shrine of Healing, including Ord Mantell, of course, where she hopes to unite with some of the other Soule knights, and she encounters Valen. Very much a trial that she has to overcome, as it always is for Senya whenever she's faced with Valen. So I think you could argue that she's the one who undergoes the symbolic pilgrimage in this case.
I know, and I do have to say, when I first was reading about this, I'm like, oh no, well, did anyone actually do this? Is there a chance that the malady, Arcann's malady, would have infected everyone involved? Like, no. Senya did more than just the basic facing the trials of the pilgrimage, which would in turn purify the spirit. What an ultimate pilgrimage of sorts. Immensely important too. But I also think too, in regard to the revelation here, like, how have these visions impacted Arcann since Voss all those years ago? How could these same visions have influenced him and his actions in Dragon's Maw? Let me play you a couple of interesting clips from Dragon's Maw chapter.
My father was right to recognize your strength, but are you in control? Or does he pull the strings?
So I guess I would attest to the fact that he maybe had this dream in his mind, right? Which actually is what Sonore identified as an actual vision. that he had a place through atonement by our player character's side in the future. But the fact that he actually still has questions, he wants to basically ask some probing questions here.
Right,
Are you in control here, or is he still behind the wheel? So it's not inherent trust based upon these weird dreams he may or may not have been having about the future and where he stands in regard to atonement.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think that's so important to establish too, that it's not the case that just because he says my destiny is to join the alliance, and just because we now know that he had visions, it's not the case that he's on some kind of railroad to take these actions. It's still very much a choice. And that's also where the differentiation between fate and destiny becomes important, I think, because
Yes. And
fate is something that you are inevitably going to do. You're fated to have a certain outcome. But destiny is something that you create through your choices, right? So you still have agency when you talk about your destiny.
Here's another one.
I'm beyond redemption. I can't change the past, but I can atone for it by joining your alliance.
And here's a big one. This is what we're going to use as segue to the next section here.
Your destiny is to lead Zakul, and mine is to join the alliance.
Note the word destiny that he uses here. This is big here. And I think these words, now that we go back and listen to some of these pieces of dialogue from the previous chapters of the story, I mean, I know that we know what we know now, right? So it's hindsight's always 2020 looking back, but you can't help but notice some of the choices and words here. So that clip takes us to our next discussion point, which is destiny and fate and the difference between the two. So I want to quickly dive into destiny, and let's start off with a basic definition here. So destiny, a predetermined course of events often held to be an irresistible power or agency. And while this definition also refers to the idea of predetermined events, destiny is something we can actively shape and alter. Unlike fate, there's an element of choice in destiny, and qualities such as courage, compassion, willpower, and patience can all help change a given individual's destiny. Spiritually, destiny is intimately connected to our ultimate life path. When a person chooses to step up and take responsibility for their own lives, then they are actively shaping their destiny instead of leaving their lives to fate. Isn't that interesting? Fulfilling our destiny involves consciously developing a connection to our deepest inner selves and maturing on an emotional, mental, and spiritual level. I love that.
I do too.
And I
How
love that for
perfectly
Arcann too. Yes.
Describes him perfectly. Perfectly describes the character development that he has undergone.
All right, still on the topic of destiny, I did want to play a few clips from 7.3 from the things that Arcann says in the second scene, which we like to refer to as the romance scene, essentially, but brings out a lot of interesting parts of his character, new facets of this wonderful character. And so let's go ahead and listen to these clips.
I saw centuries worth of horrors committed by my father. I felt the rage and the cruelty born of my desperation to please him. The suffering and the devastation I caused, it was all made plain to me. When I learned what my father had done in Dartmoor's ruins, old fears resurfaced. I was afraid I saw those ruins because I was doomed to follow in his footsteps.
Interesting. So that ties directly into our discussion of fate and destiny. And that was revealed to be the big takeaway by Arcann from this experience in the ruins, that he was innately scared of the fact that this might be his possible future.
Yeah.
If this would be a destiny that he could, alter or steer a little bit differently to get a different outcome, or if it was fate. What is your take on this, Mara?
Yeah, I think you phrased it perfectly. This is a possible future that he was afraid that he was seeing. And what it really reminds me of is what I was explaining before about the stage and the hero's journey in the innermost cave or the belly of the whale where the hero faces his big ordeal. This is it for Arcann. And it's very much actually like what Luke faces on his hero's journey on Dagobah. And probably some of our listeners already thought about that when I was talking
Mhm.
about the hero's journey.
Yeah.
George Lucas was extremely inspired by Joseph Campbell, and he very deliberately made Luke's story follow the stages of the hero's journey. So Luke has a very clear innermost cave or belly of the whale ordeal in the cave on Dagobah, where he sees a vision of Vader and he fights Vader, and then the helmet cracks and he sees his own face underneath
Mm.
Darth Vader's helmet. So it's that same kind of thing of fearing that you are going to turn into the monster, and in this case, the father monster. It actually mirrors very closely what Arkan experiences on his dark cave or belly of the whale ordeal journey on this planet.
Yeah. That scene in particular really hit me, even as a child watching that movie.
Yeah, because it's terrifying, right? Especially when you
Hmm.
watch that movie as a child.
Yeah.
Yeah, of what could I possibly turn into if my future took the darkest possible turn and I became the monster? That would
Hmm.
be that would be terrifying. And again, especially if it also has that uncanny layer of the monster being your father, somebody who's supposed to be safe.
Mm. Your greatest supporter, right?
Yeah. And I think that's
Wow.
why, again, these stories hit us so hard because it is this archetypal motif or journey that we see repeated in Star Wars stories. Because Star Wars is such a mythological universe, it very closely follows this kind of structure.
It's such a hard-hitting scene on that regard, and I can definitely see this being a huge moment for Arkin exploring the ruins of Null. Still coming to terms with the fact that he has this ability. He has the ability to have these visions.
Yeah.
And thank goodness he's got such a great mentor in Sana Ray. Wow. I I love how this story has grown.
I do too. And I think it's amazing that we've talked about how the writers managed to fill all these gaps in our understanding, but they did so without retconning anything. And I think that's
Hmm.
really important to get across. We're definitely not saying that they retconned Arkhan's story. They didn't. They just expanded upon it in a way
Yeah.
that enhances our understanding of the character and actually elevates it even more.
Let's take a brief foray into fate. Let's discuss fate here for a second.
Mhm.
Fate being an inevitable and often adverse outcome, condition, or end. The main things some people think about when they think about the word fate are the morai. So those are also known as the Greek three fates in Greek mythology. So they were the three women that were spinning strings, essentially, that determined a person's cycle of life. They were Cloto, the spinner. She spun the thread of life from her distaff onto her spindle. Laxus, a lotter or the drawer of lots, who measured the thread of life allotted to each person with her measuring rod. And Atropos, inevitable or literally unturning. She was the cutter of the thread of life. She chose the manner of each person's death, and when their time had come, she cut their life thread with her abhorred shears. So, in Greek mythology, the role of the Moirai was to ensure that every being, mortal and divine, lived out their destiny as it was assigned to them by the laws of the universe. For mortals, this destiny spanned their entire lives and was represented by a thread spun from a spindle. Overall, fate tends to have a negative connotation, unlike destiny, which has a positive one. And for as it pertains to fate, for example, people who experience misfortune, they often tend to think that fate is the cause. So it's like, that's where we get such terms as seal one's fate, a fate worse than death, etc. And which usually suggests that fate something undesirable and negative. So
Mhm.
This is interesting to me, Mara. So it says here, spiritually, fate is what occurs when we ignore our life calling and don't actively work to reconnect with our souls or true nature. When we leave our lives up to fate, we are basically handing over the reins of control to other people and outside circumstances. Here's the big takeaway. When we don't put any effort into consciously changing and evolving, what happens is fate.
That is fascinating.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
When you don't
Everything
put
you
any
just
effort.
said.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, everything you just said is actually fascinating to me. I love the idea of these divine beings, the fates in
Mm-hmm.
Greek mythology. As a Scandinavian, I instantly thought of the Norns, who are
Mm-hmm.
also those kinds of spinners. And I thought back to the clip we played at the beginning of this proclamation by Haskell, who also talks
Yes.
about threads of fate. But especially what you said here at the end, because it pertains so perfectly to Arcann and his journey. And we know that he always rebelled against the idea of a predetermined fate. That was his entire beef with the Scions, right? That
Yes.
they prophesized his fall in a way that didn't allow for the possibility of any kind of choice. But he actually always embraced the idea of destiny, and he always insisted on being able to forge his own destiny.
Yep.
And now he fully embraces his destiny in the sense of actually having embraced and rediscovered his true self and his true path in life.
And that's even one of the big scenes on the flagship fight. You can actually tell him it's over, Arcann. Just, just give it up. It's over. This is before the ceiling part fell down and stuff, but he says, I determine my own fate, and he continues fighting us,
Yeah,
our player character.
yeah.
Yeah, it's super interesting. But yeah, I always associate Arcann with destiny as it pertains to his whole character's journey as well. Changing, making the choice to change. He's putting in effort to consciously change and evolve, therefore avoiding fate. What would happen if he handed over the reins of control to other people in outside circumstances? That's not
Yeah.
what he stands for. That's not what happened in the story. And it's perfect. I love it.
Yeah, and it's what he always rebelled against. It's what science wanted him to do and what he refused to do.
Mm-hmm. I do want to tell you one cool thing that I found, briefly tell you that I found a psychology journal. And the title of this journal is How to Fulfill Your Own Destiny.
Oh, interesting.
So this is interesting. There's a few bullet points, but a few which that I read are extremely interesting as it pertains to Arcann and his journey to fulfill his destiny, thereby, not leaving it to the hands of fate, I guess you could say, in a way. So, how to fulfill your destiny. As long as you're consciously seeking to learn, grow, and spiritually evolve, you are fulfilling your destiny. However, if you're wanting to achieve your highest potential, you might benefit from the following tips. Here we go, Mara. First one, surround yourself with supportive people who inspire you. Critics and judgmental people often trigger huge amounts of self-doubt within us. Sometimes we actually listen to these unsupportive people who tell us how to live our lives, resulting in us choosing the wrong life path. Valkorian, anyone? Like
I
literally.
was just about to say,
Jeez, man. Yeah. Identify people in your life who are negative influences and remove them. Seek out kind, inspiring, and empathetic friends. Here's the second one. Identify limiting beliefs, right? When we believe our thoughts, we experience anger, insecurity, sadness, shame, and anxiety. The number one greatest block most people experience when trying to fulfill their destiny are core beliefs. This is mind-blowing. You're not going to believe this. Core beliefs are the main ideas we carry about ourselves, which we were conditioned to believe since birth. Common core beliefs include, I am unworthy, I can't do this, I'm a bad person, and I don't deserve happiness. That's a big oof.
If anybody has any doubt that Arcann was conditioned to having those extremely negative core beliefs. Just go and watch
Mhm.
Bodhi's incredible video Lamentation, and you'll hear all the awful things that Valkorion told him
Oh yeah,
as a child,
it hits so
constantly
hard.
reiterating that he was not worthy of his affection or
He's
his
weak.
throne.
Yep.
He's weak.
Just a couple more here. Ask other people for support. Oh, this is a big thing. This is something that Arcann has obviously demonstrated that he's learning how to do at this point. It says here, you don't need to travel your journey alone. If you need some guidance, Sonore, seek out help from a loved one, counselor, or spiritual teacher. People who have walked this path before you can share a lot of wisdom, which will benefit you greatly.
I would say that fits pretty perfectly.
Yeah. Last one here I want to highlight is show kindness towards yourself. This is pretty big. And this is pretty big since 7.3 came out, which we will discuss in a second here. But this part is really moving. Show kindness towards yourself. The more love and compassion you show towards yourself, the more you are naturally moving towards your ultimate destiny. Be mindful of negative and critical thoughts and let them pass without attaching to them. The thing that sticks out to me in this regard, Mara, is what Arcann says. I'm heading in the right direction.
Yes, absolutely. Which the imagery he uses there of being headed in the right direction, not only does that tie in perfectly to what we just said about destiny being your true and authentic path in life, but also it's very noticeable to me that that is actually the first time Arcann has expressed any kind of self-compassion or even just positive self-talk. It's
Right.
the only time that I can recall that he gives himself some credit for the immense journey that he's been on.
You hit the nail on the head with that one. I completely agree. I think it's the first and only time, which is why it's such a big deal. But this is a great segue as well, because we're going to jump right into the second half of the second scene. So what we referred to as the romance scene. And I want to kick this off with one thing that Arcann follows up the previous conversation about the things that he was struggling with in regard to the visions in the Null ruins and how he was scared that he had a fate to follow in Valkorion's footsteps. And here's the flip side, how he's turning this around.
But there were visions of hope as well, of serving a greater purpose. I fear those are the most difficult to remember.
So this is what Arcann says with a non-romanced tune. I love this sentiment here. Still turn this around into something very, very positive. Visions of hope, serving a greater purpose. Although he does acknowledge, and rightfully so, that it is still a struggle, that maybe those visions of hope in serving the greater purpose are still a little bit maybe a little bit more hard to remember at times, but he's trying. Let's jump over to his romantic response at this very moment.
But in my vision, I also saw a place by your side, and what I needed to become, to be worthy of it.
Oh, I love that line.
Okay, let me start this off. First of all, this is one thing. This is harkening back to an amazing scene during Unmasked Regret, where Arcann mentions the same phrase. But let me first, really quickly, Mara, define this. So if we're going actually old school back to the dictionary. So by your side means that you essentially remain loyal to someone. So it's a sentiment of support and friendship, invoking a feeling of strong partnership, as in we're in this together. Not necessarily romantic relationship sentiment, but it's profound in this moment, as it was back in Unmasked Regret. Do you agree?
I absolutely agree. And I love that you went to the dictionary definition of what it means to be by someone's side, because even though he only says this if you're in a romance with him, I think it's really important to emphasize that he's not saying, I foresaw myself being with you in a romantic way. That's not it at all.
No, it's
He's
not.
just saying, I saw the potential for redeeming myself and following my destiny, my true path in life, by devoting myself to you and, us going on this journey together, not necessarily as a couple.
It's that loyalty, swearing the fealty, to another person.
Yeah.
Here's the clip, and I'm going to play it alongside the unmasked regret clip.
But in my vision, I also saw a place by your side, and what I needed to become, to be worthy of it.
Here's unmasked regret.
When I see you, I feel something I never knew was possible. I want to stay by your side through whatever comes.
Same powerful sentiment here coming from
Yes.
this character who is known for swearing devotion, fealty, and loyalty to our player character. It's so powerful.
Absolutely. This is the fealty trope that we've been talking about in previous proclamations as something that is so important to this courtly, transcendent love that characterizes the relationship between our character and Arcann. And notice in the unmasked regret clip that you just played us that he is not asking for a position as our character's a lover, a boyfriend, spouse, anything like that. He's simply asking to get to be by his or her side as a loyal knight, essentially, somebody who's swearing fealty and questing together, going on this journey together in this shared destiny.
I love this. He then follows up that amazing sentiment where that was his vision that he saw. What he needed to do to get to be in a place where he could be our partners, loyal partners. He followed it up with this here.
I saw the work I could do, how I could dedicate myself to atonement, like helping you stop Darth Malgus. Reliving that vision, it reminded me that I have far to go before I can be forgiven for all that I inflicted upon others, if that is even possible. But I am moving in the right direction.
So that's it right there. I'm moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
How monumental is that for this character?
It really is monumental. As we said before, it's his first expression of self-compassion, essentially, in the story. Also, again, speaking of courtly love, it's so important that Arcann constantly speaks about proving himself worthy to be by our character's side, because again, it's characteristic of this type of romance and this particular kind of love that it has to be morally elevating.
Right.
So he is not, by saying that, I don't believe that he is, I don't actually see that as negative self-talk. He's not necessarily saying I'm not good enough for you. He's just putting our character on such a pedestal as the beloved object, as the knight or the worshipper is supposed to do in the courtly love trope, that he always has to try to elevate himself continuously to be worthy of serving her or dedicating himself to her. It's a very old-fashioned and very romantic way of thinking about love, in my opinion.
I know. And I do have a corresponding very, very powerful line that Arcann has from Unmasked Regret that goes right along with that. I am heading in the right direction. Are you ready for this?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to play the 7-3 clip again really quickly first.
But I am moving in the right direction.
And contrast it, compare it with this line from Unmasked Regret.
Perhaps one day I'll share the faith you have in me.
We have it.
Yeah.
We have it. We have this. He's starting to have that faith in himself, exuding that confidence. That means so much to me.
Yeah. What an immense development from Unmasked Regret and up until this. And actually, this is something else that we talked about wanting to see back when we did our prognostications for 7.3. And we asked each other, what would you most like to see from Arkann's future development? And we both said, well, we would love to see him becoming more of a whole person, to start to have real faith in himself and perhaps exude a little bit more confidence. And we got that.
First step. I'm moving in the right direction. And I love that he's looking out the door in that scene. He did the classic walking away from our player character again. He's looking out the door, which I know you have something to say about in a second, but
I do.
it meant so much to me. It's like every single line that the devs crafted for this story update hits so hard for this character. It's amazing.
And the fact that you can play clips for us from years ago, content that came out years ago, where he uses the same signature phrases, just shows how good this writing team is at keeping him in character. Even though no doubt it's no longer the same person who's in charge of writing the content for Arcann, it's very clear that whoever wrote these lines deeply cares about this character and is very much aware of what came before and how to echo things that came before in a way that just expands and I would actually say improves upon what we already had.
Right. Let me do a quick dive into Arcann's amazing response to our player character saying something kind of doubtful towards him at that point, saying like, yeah, I don't think people are ever going to forget the things that you did, which is, I mean, it's fair. It's fair enough. But anyway, she or he brings it up again to Arcann in this very moment that people aren't going to forget the things that he's done. And this is how Arcann responds.
I know. I will never expect forgiveness or even acceptance from anyone I have hurt, but I will cherish any that is offered.
Which is such a mature response and a stoic response from him. He does not give into self-pity even for a moment.
Round of applause for Arcann in that scenario.
Yeah.
And I mean, it doesn't undo anything that he's done throughout the story, obviously. But the way that they phrased that what he said there is also phenomenal. I will cherish any forgiveness offered. Wow.
So instead of being angry and resentful that he didn't receive the affection that he could have rightfully expected from his father, right? He is now moved to a point where he is just deeply grateful for any affection that he does receive. That's an immense step for this character.
It is. I'm going to play you 2 clips at this point. These are for the non-romance character showing Arcann's support in this moment when he states, I am moving in the right direction.
You're right. I have fought so many battles in my life. Only now I have found something worth fighting for. I don't think I could have ever seen things in this light without your help. There will never be enough I can do to thank you.
I love the phrasing there. I fought so many battles in my life, and now I've found something worth fighting for.
Yeah, I do too. He has found purpose at last.
And again, the profound thank you that he provides to our player character for the support on this journey. It's just so touching.
Yeah.
I just want to give the writers like a hug.
Yeah, I do too. Thank you, writers. Thank you so much for giving us something of this level of quality.
And so much of it. Look at all the dialogue he gets. This is just phenomenal.
Yeah, and the branching paths too, depending on your previous choices, which, as we said earlier, is just something that massively improves our investment in these scenes. I also love that profound thank you, as you pointed out, it's not subservient in any kind of way. I still feel like there's that feeling of mutual respect between the characters. Even if you choose the dialogue option where you are kind of harsh to him and you say, okay, well, you can't expect for this to ever go away. And he just accepts that. And he still thanks you for the insight that you have provided him with and the opportunities that you've provided him with. And there is that little mutual bow between the characters. It's not him bowing to the commander. It's both of them having that little reciprocal exchange of respect.
It's ideal. And I love the player character, like my player character, even gives him a nice smile as Arcann walks away. Yeah. It hits so hard. My heart, I can't take it. It's amazing. But Mara, you know what time it is now, right?
Is it time for dessert?
It's time for dessert. It's time to talk about the romance scene that blessed our lives. I can barely. This is just so profoundly amazing in every regard.
It's everything we could have ever hoped for.
I know. I guess I'll play the lines first. We'll dive into the lines, and then we'll talk about the scene itself.
Yeah,
there's just
we'll
so
we'll
much to
do our
say.
best to say something coherent and moderately
I
sensible
know.
after
And
listening to these
and
lines.
don't forget, this is we're pulling a thread out of here. This is going to be its own proclamation where we dive deeply into this. So there's just so much to say. So Arcann says, but I'm moving in the right direction. And here's the romantic response after our player character says to Arcann, now you see what I see.
Not one day has passed at your side where I felt alone. Your belief is a gift, one that I cherish deeply. You are so captivating. It is difficult to find the words to say how grateful I am for you. But I want to thank you, in every way possible, for not giving up on me.
Oh my God. Okay, those 3 lines killed me, Mara.
Yeah.
They killed they literally killed me when I did the story.
I
It hit so hard. The fact that Arcann professes the fact that he's never at one moment felt alone because he was basically powered by our belief in him from the start, and that he cherishes such a gift.
And I feel like it's such a big part of what we adore about this character, that he can express such a strong sentiment that just means so much in very few words. He doesn't need to give us I love yous. We
Yeah.
didn't even need a proposal scene or anything of that kind. This is the most romantic thing that I could have possibly imagined taking place between these 2 characters, and we're going to unpack that
Yes.
more. Also talking about the nonverbal communication,
Oh
which is
my God.
immense in this scene.
Dude, that's insane. Let's talk about the second line for a second here. I remember when he said this line, when I heard it for the first time. You are so captivating. It's hard to put in words how I feel about you. Can
Yeah.
you think of a better way to encapsulate this transcendent courtly love that he has, that these 2 characters have for each other, than the word captivating? Captivate. He's captivated by our character's entire aura, her essence. It's not just about looks. It's not just about one specific thing. He's entranced by our player character and her basic essence. Imagine something being a better compliment than that.
I can't imagine anything being a better compliment than that. And I can't imagine anything more perfect for this particular romance and everything that we've already talked about that characterizes this romance. As you said, it's so crucial that Arcann never emphasizes our character's physical beauty.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what this is about. This is about a spiritual, transcendent connection between these characters that goes way beyond any kind of carnal or erotic desire. And I'm not saying that that isn't there. I'm sure that it is, but we don't really see that. It's not what's featured strongly in these romance scenes because it takes such a second place to what's really important, which is this deep connection between them.
Deep transcendent. And for somebody like Arcann, somebody that you see even during dark times, when he's on the throne, when things are being thrown his way, when Valen's provoking him, for example, you can see in his eyes, he's thinking deeply about everything. The wheels are turning at all moments for the character of Arcann. And for him to say something like, it's hard to put into words to show how I feel, from someone who basically you get the feeling that everything he says is for a reason. There's no extra words that you ever see Arcann saying that are just throwaway words.
Yeah, and I think that's also how he manages to say something that is so intensely romantic without it becoming saccharine, or too sugary for people like you and me who are very much not into sappy, sugary kind of romance. I mean, for me at least, I have a very low threshold for that kind of thing. It doesn't take too much for it to be sort of a little bit nauseating for me.
Right? Yeah, I lose interest fast in that.
Yeah. But like you said, with Arcann, there's never any bloat, and it's the same thing for his letter writing, where they're always really powerful. They hit so hard, but they're usually fairly succinct and fairly brief because he only really needs to say one thing. He doesn't need to use flowery language. He doesn't need to shower us with compliments or anything like that. He really just needs to express this deep, heartfelt emotion in a couple of words.
Let me play this last one again one more time. This one really hit hard as well. I can't, they all did, let's be real. But I just lost it. I lost it with these lines. Here we go.
But I want to thank you, in every way possible, for not giving up on me.
He just needed somebody to actually give him a chance and have some faith in him for the first time in his life, essentially. And I'm not discounting the fact that Dexon had faith in him and that Senya did at one point. But I mean, let's be real, Arkann's been alone for such a long time during
basically his
adult
whole life almost.
Yeah.
The fact that it was a thank you, and I know we're going to talk about what actually is happening during this part, but a thank you in this very moment is just immensely powerful to me. And again, it's hard. It's been like a week and some change since this came out, and for the longest time I couldn't actually sit through this and listen to it without getting kind of emotional about it again.
Yeah.
This really hits so hard. They nailed it. This is the character to a T. They couldn't have done him any better, in my opinion, than this.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think we should also mention that one of the reasons why these lines probably hit us so hard is because they kind of echo the way that we feel about the character, right?
Yeah.
That this story is captivating. This character is captivating. We're immensely grateful to have discovered this and to be a part of this and to get to create content celebrating this story and this character.
It is a blessing. That's a great point you made. It's such an honor to be talking about these wonderful characters from these expansions in this wonderful game. But you're right. You're exactly right. Thank you for not giving up on me. You could actually take that as maybe a message to us, the player, that made the choices to keep him in the story. How impactful. Great point, Mara.
But you too. I mean, that is such a good point. That's a takeaway for us as players. Don't give up on characters just because they have a kill option, especially not this character, because look what you would have missed.
Oh, the best stuff in the game. All right, Mara. So let's do a dive into the actual scenes and the framing that the devs did of these scenes, these pivotal Arcann romance moments in 7.3. So
which are so good too.
Should we start with the basking? I think
the basking, as we call it. Yeah.
Yes. Wait, no. We actually start with the his what do you call it? His trademark, right?
Oh yeah.
So we see Arcann first as this scene progresses on, when he's talking about noting that he has a long way to go still, but he's going in the right direction. He stands up from the bench and walks away from our character, which is a trademark at this point, right?
Yes, it is. That's something that we see Arcann doing every time he feels really strong emotion. He has a tendency to actually walk away. We see him doing it in Unmasked Regret. When he's about to fully confess his feelings, he walks away. We see it in the romance scene right before Echoes of Oblivion, when he talks about his fear of facing Valkorion again, he walks away. So when there's really strong emotion, he physically tends to withdraw, and then our character follows him.
And again, it's done perfectly here in this moment. This is also where our character tells him, now you see what I see.
Yes.
And she basically echoes the kind of nice compliments, the nice words that Arcann had for our player character in Unmasked Regret, which we will pull that thread gently out in another proclamation dedicated only to this romance discussion, which I'm super stoked about too. Who knew I was going to be excited about a romance discussion? But I want to quickly segue into basking, Mara. And what we're talking about basking is we're talking about one of the most profound moments, I'm not exaggerating at all, in this game as a whole, between two characters and we refer to it as the basking, but it's basking in each other's presence.
Yeah.
And everyone who's done the story knows what we're talking about. The moment right before Arcann says this.
You are so captivating. It is difficult to find the words to say how grateful I am for you.
Mara, talk to me about the basking.
We can always find another reason to play that line one more time.
Oh my gosh, it's amazing.
But yeah, the basking. That was just such an intensely romantic moment to me that again just emphasizes how this is about their spiritual transcendent connection. When these two characters step close to each other, they close their eyes, slightly bow their heads, and you can just see them soaking up each other's presence. And that's enough. They don't even need to touch, because again, this is something that is beyond physical touch. And I mean, you might read something like a force bond into this if your player character is force sensitive. I'm sure that they are, in a very literal way, sensing each other through the force and even communing through the force. But even for a character who is a tech user and not force sensitive, I think it actually reads in the exact same way, that just being so close to somebody who means that much to you.
And
is
somebody that's home. Going back to our
Yeah.
home discussion, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
It's the feeling of complete comfort and understanding, just being within each
Absolutely.
other's presence. It doesn't have to be the force thing, which I think it does play a lot into, but it doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
You know the feeling of just being present in a moment with somebody. And what a profound scene. I never would have thought that that would ever happen in this
I wouldn't
game
either.
between these two
Yeah.
characters. Oh my God, it was so moving. I lost it there too. I got to be honest. I basically
Yeah.
lost it the whole
I did,
scene. I was just
I did
gone.
too. That was the moment that really got to me more than anything else in this entire scene, because that was beyond my wildest dreams. I thought that I would only either write that myself or read it in somebody else's fan fiction. I never
Yeah.
thought I would actually see that in the canon story. So that was amazing.
It's transcendent love, pure and simple. That's what it is. I do
Yeah.
want to read you something really quickly that I thought was interesting. I just did a little bit of research and I found an interesting concept called kama mutta. And it's a Sanskrit term that means moved by love. And essentially, kama mutta is characterized as the sudden feeling of oneness, love, belonging, or union with an individual person, a family, a team, a nation, nature, or even the cosmos. In other words, experiencing kama mutta inspires people to become compassionate, loving, and connected. And in technical terms, people feel motivated to nurture existing or even initiate new communal relationships. The emotion itself may only last a few seconds, but the motivation that emerges could endure for minutes, days, or even years. So, Mara, do you think this fits? Is this moved to a point, moved by love, sudden feeling of oneness, love, belonging, or a union with an individual person or something greater?
Oh yeah, I think it fits. I think that describes this scene perfectly. And I want us to take a moment to really think about what this means for a character like Arcann to experience that kind of love. This is somebody who is a twin, a lost twin. This is somebody who is an amputee. This is somebody who has been incredibly divisive, somebody who has started galactic scale wars, who has been extremely alone, even though he was in a position of supreme power. To go from all of that to sharing this kind of love with somebody is just immensely powerful, I think.
It is. And to have a moment like this with no touching, transcendent love.
Yeah.
I can't even, like Arkann says, it's hard to put into words how I feel.
It is. And
Like-
also what you said before about how kama mutta is also about increased empathy and making new
Yes.
connections. It's not just about this one person.
Yep.
It's about a sense of being connected, to, well, the living force, to use a Star Wars phrase, I suppose, to this cosmic energy in the universe, which is very much a sentiment that Arcann actually expresses in the letter that he sends us after our time in Interpreter's Retreat, where he says that Sana Ray introduced him to some of her friends, and for the first time in his life, he finds himself wanting the best for near strangers.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
And it says here too, remember, Kamamuta, the motivation that emerges from Kamamuta could endure for minutes, days, or even years from this kind of feeling of love, oneness, belonging with an individual to even the cosmos. Which also takes me to one more thing that I think kind of gives the same vibe as Kamamuta, which I think does a great job of describing the power of this scene between these two characters, not touching, just basking in each other's presence. So it's called shared transcendence. And it's described here as something we experience in certain moments of being together with another person, leading us to becoming transcendent together, releasing all personal limitations and the understanding of our own capabilities. It's an unsustainable union where distinctions between self and community, mind and body, between whatever separates us from each other, it's all set aside. Sudden, momentary, and unsustainable because we must ultimately return to ourselves, back to the real world. But in this shared transcendent moment, we find each other genuinely and totally together in harmony, synergy, accord, and beautiful, graceful, excellent at the top of our veritable games. To summarize, it says here, this is a huge, huge moment. This is a transformative moment as we return changed, not the same person we were. Our understanding of who and what we can become, our very selves, our relationships, has been redefined. These are the moments we use to measure a well-lived life.
You know what, Brody? After hearing all of these amazing things that you've just told me about these concepts, I no longer feel like a goof for crying over this scene. That makes perfect sense now.
Because
this character who used to be so saturated in symbols of disconnection, all the things we talked about up until this point, having this kind of moment. Wow, what a character development.
Yeah, and that's why we also like this description of these two different theories or ideas, I guess you could say, is because it's not only experiencing a profound, moving moment with some other individual in a moment in time, but also gaining a greater understanding of how they fit into the larger realm, how they can influence and be a positive influence within the galaxy, I guess you could say. It's more than just one person. It's immensely powerful for this specific character of Arcann. And this moment meant everything to me as a fan.
And we need the whole history of this character to really be able to fully appreciate this moment, which I think is also what we appreciate about it. Because you might have had a romance scene that you could watch disconnected from everything else in the game, and you could think, oh, that's a really sweet moment, that gives me nice fluffy feelings.
Yeah,
that's not what this is. This is something that you'd only ever understand the true impact of if you followed the entire journey of the character of Arcann, especially while playing it with your own character, because of the things we previously discussed, as opposed to simply watching it disconnected from the story as a whole on YouTube, for example.
Yeah, that's an amazing point to make, and it fits perfectly in the entire narrative we've had, this proclamation.
Yeah,
it's perfection. Ugh.
It really is.
Okay, so if you thought that was a huge moment, this next moment I could barely deal. Let's talk about the second moment. We talked about basking. Let's talk about the hug.
The hug.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh my gosh. Oh my, okay, I really lost it at this. I said that for every single scene I know so far, but I lost it.
If you lost it, imagine how I felt, because I have been begging to get to hug Arcann for
Yes.
so long on my Jedi Knight, who romances him, of course.
And I can attest to this because I know that she has been asking for this for a very long time. And I'm telling you right now, before you continue, Mara, it is my personal headcanon 100%, that the devs literally they looked at the forum posts that you made and they read it and was like, this is a profoundly impactful idea. We are definitely going to do this. And it's my headcanon that you single-handedly inspired this. So
what an honor to be credited with that.
It's going to take a lot of convincing otherwise to make me not believe this anymore. But let me start. I need to start something because I need you to take this away from me in just a second here. But
all right.
Hugging, physical acknowledgement of the presence of another person with the intention of expressing affection. Interestingly enough, sometimes hugging is also meant to express reunion after separation. And in that case, it represents affection beyond words. It has been shown that hugging can release large quantities of the human pair bonding hormone. Thus, hugging someone literally deepens our relationship with that person on a biochemical level. It's a poignant, powerful gesture of love and support that goes straight to the emotional centers of our brain. Let's discuss the immense power of a hug in this very moment versus a kiss or something else.
I think it was the perfect way to conclude this powerful moment, because he leans in and you think he's going to go in for kiss, right? And then we get the hug instead, which to me is just so much more impactful than a kiss would have been in that moment, because it denotes all the things that you just read aloud to us: a friendship, connection, affection beyond words, in a way that I don't feel like a kiss would have signified that in the same way. Because these two characters might be lovers, but they're more than anything, they're friends, right? This is not just an enemies to lovers story, as we've said before. It's an enemies to friends to lovers story. And I think the friend stage is crucial.
It is. And not to mention that this scene, this very moment when they're hugging, is when this line happens.
But I want to thank you, in every way possible, for not giving up on me.
It's the double whammy right there, Mara. I had no chance. I had no chance to survive that. And the fact that they put this amazingly deep animation or expression on Arcann's face in this moment kills me. And then they cut to our character with her face. Oh.
And interestingly enough, I saw your video of your character, who is a body type 2, I believe, in this moment, and it sort of zoomed in on her eyes, which was actually, she was really expressive. And we all know that our characters desperately need a graphic update, and
they do.
The animations could be better, the textures could be better, etc. But still, even just her eyes really showed how impactful this was for her too. But for my character, who is the petite body type, the body type 1, it showed her whole face, so I could see the expression around her mouth, and she does this lovely smile, which is also kind of pained, because you can see that the whole impact of their shared history, everything he's been through, everything he's overcome, she's really feeling that in that moment. And
he's thanking her. It's a profound thank you from the depths of his heart. Thank you every way possible for not giving up on me. Oh my goodness.
For not giving up on me.
During a hug? Oh my gosh. The devs killed me with this. I could barely function. It was just so impactful.
Devs, you turned our int J brains into mush.
I know, right? What did you do to us? You broke us.
You did.
I mean, seriously, they did. Like I said earlier in this proclamation, I literally took off multiple days from work to have a response to this and record, and we could not even deal. We couldn't do it. We couldn't watch it again because it was so powerful to us as huge fans. Again, the parasocial relationship that we've formed with this character, it literally feels like we know this character and we know him very well. We can identify with him, and then couple in everything else about having choices in this game, having made choices over almost 12 years to get to this point.
Yeah.
And to be in this moment where it's knocked out of the park in every regard. 10 out of 10. You can't beat it. It means so much.
It does. And we truly do know this character, and not to just toot our own horn, but I think we have evidence for the fact that we really know the character of Arcann, because we were able to predict so much of what we actually got in this scene simply based on what we'd seen before. And also, I think when we needed to take some time to really take this in, it's also because we needed to do our own basking, right? We needed to bask in this moment and actually just soak in everything that it made us feel, which is, I think, not how either of us usually engages with fiction. It's not our first response. Our first response is usually to be very analytical and think about, okay, well, how can we get something out of this in a more intellectual kind of way? That's usually what we enjoy, but it really speaks to the quality of this romance scene that we want to just bask in the emotion.
And that too, it as Jays as well. This was, like, to quote Arcann, unfamiliar territory for me personally, that I was overcome with such emotion from this story that it was almost uncomfortable for me personally, that I felt, as an introvert, the way that I am, I felt honestly kind of exhausted. I had to take some time for myself to recharge because of the emotions that it made me feel. And I guess that's hitting a home run with me. If you can make me feel that kind of way, that I have to actually recover. Because it means so much, and these stories just mean the world to us, and we're such big fans, and we feel so blessed to even be having these wonderful conversations together on this topic we're so passionate about.
We truly do. And if we were to talk about, what is art and what constitutes art, and can a computer game be art, I think everything we've said now, it means that would have to be a resounding yes. Because if the purpose of art is to make you feel something really profound, well, I mean, this certainly achieved that for us.
Yeah, you did. You made us feel. Let's also take a moment to acknowledge, Mara, that we strongly feel that the devs have knocked out Arcann's character arc and the way that they've shown him to be in all of the different updates over the years. They've just knocked it out of the park every single time. There's not a single misstep, as far as I'm concerned.
I agree completely. So should we talk about what another thing that we also felt was just perfect about this scene, which is the physical setting?
We should. Let's discuss the doorway. Do you have anything to say about that, Mara, and what it might mean for the moment itself, that all of this took place at the very end? All these profound moments, the basking and the hug, took place in a doorway. What does that mean?
I have a lot to say about the doorway. I think there is a lot of symbolic value to the fact that this significant moment takes place in a doorway. First of all, we talked about Arcann getting up from the seat and walking towards the doorway. That in itself is significant to me, because he walks towards the light, right? He walks towards an opening. It opens onto nature, and that lighting on Voss, which is just beautiful. It's warm and golden. So I think it's fairly clear that there's something symbolic going on here with him walking from the dark corner that he's seated in towards that opening. Also, a doorway is always a liminal space. It's a space where you transition from one place or state of being to another. So to use a slightly academic phrase, you could talk about the dialectics of inside and outside in this scene. And he is right on the verge of that. And in fiction, an open door always has something to do with going from one state of being to another, of some kind of initiation, right? Or even connection and welcoming. Because if you think about what it means just in everyday life to open a door to somebody, well, you open a door when you either leave your place to go somewhere else on some kind of adventure, perhaps, or you open your door to let somebody in. So everything we associate with open doors speaks directly into everything else we've said about what this scene signifies. Also, I want to talk for a little bit about the fact that this door is shaped as an archway, because I did some research on what archways can symbolize.
Oh.
And I mean, first of all, arches in architecture are designed to lift the eye upwards, which is why you find so many arches on churches, because you're supposed to look upwards, which is supposed to make you think about God, obviously, in the case of churches. So arches always have this spiritual connotation, which, again, fits perfectly with everything we said about the spiritual connection between these two characters and the transcendence of this moment. Also, archways are especially salient when it comes to themes of rebirth and transition again. An archway in architecture is something that's supposed to hold something up. It's supposed to support a structure. So there's a sense of safety and support there. But also arches represent a shelter, especially if you think about a wedding arch. We don't have a proposal in this scene. We have something that to me is perhaps even more romantic. But I couldn't help but think about a wedding arch when they stood there and basked in each other's presence, and in a way did exchange vows, even if it was partly done so silently. And the reason why people use arches at weddings is because obviously it's supposed to represent the home that the couple will build together. And also it's supposed to symbolize a doorway that you step through to transition into a new life.
Wow.
And we've talked about home, and Arcann referring to our character as his home in this scene. So I feel like that symbolism is very on point.
Let's discuss specifically Arcann's character growth as what we've been provided in 7.3, which obviously we've already firmly established as being fundamentally great because of the amount of threads that we've been pulling off of this. Can you imagine 2 scenes, Mara, 2 scenes, and we have like what, 7 or 8 different proclamation themes that can possibly go into multiple proclamations from that alone.
Yeah, and
Just
we've
from
already
these
talked
scenes.
about it for how long now? Quite a while
Like
now.
10 hours. I love it. But Arcann's character growth in 7.3, how has he changed and how has he stayed the same? What's your take?
Well, I think he's clearly changed in the ways that we've discussed. He's become more spiritual, open to the idea of destiny in a way that he always had the seeds of that, but I feel like he's truly embraced it now. He has stepped into the role of a hero in a number of ways, as we've discussed. And also he seems to have more faith in himself for the first time. We hear him actually expressing some self-compassion, which is such a nice thing to see.
Big moment.
He is also still the Arcann that we know. He is still struggling with a number of things. He's still tortured in the way that I think we both feel is essential for this character. He can never be completely healed or completely washed clean, so to speak. If that was the case, I think something essential would be lost. This has to be a lifelong project for him, because his crimes are on that scale. It, like he says himself, he can spend the rest of his life atoning for this, but with the constant awareness that atonement might never really be within reach, or at least redemption might never be fully within reach for him.
But he's appreciative of anything that might come his way in terms of acceptance.
Exactly, which is such a humble thing for him to say.
I know.
That he's deeply grateful for anything at all that will give him any kind of joy in this life. But he's also dedicated to doing the hard work that he needs to do to repair what he can.
So let's now move on to next point. What Arcann hallmarks or trademarks that we've established over the previous proclamations as well? Which ones did we see in 7.3?
We saw a lot of them. So first of all, if we talk about signature gestures or movements, we had the turning around from our character approaching him with his back turned.
Yep.
We had the fact that he walked away in a moment of intense emotion.
Yep.
We also had the clenched fist, which was such a good arc
Oh, I
moment
love it.
when he's still sitting on the bench with our character next to him, and he talks about his trials on the planet, and he clenches his fist, and there's a moment of almost shaking. And it's just that intensity of emotion, but also it's where we see a glimpse of the darkness that he will always carry within him.
Yes.
And of course, we have the hand holding at the end after
Yes.
after the other great moments that we already talked about. We do have a moment of hand holding, which I feel like is also a key feature in the romantic relationship our character has with Arcann. There's a lot of hand holding. We're definitely going to unpack the symbolism of hands in the
Oh
story
my
in some other
gosh.
proclamation.
There's
There's
so
a lot
much to say on
about it.
that.
Yeah.
So much.
And of course, we have the bow with his hand over his heart, as we discussed, if you don't have a romance with him, if you have a friendship instead.
And we have the hallmark stoicism, which is another defining feature, which we've always loved about the character. The fact the reunion is so sweet, to the point and kind, deeply felt, but then it's great. And I love that the power posing scene as well. It's big.
Of course, that's another signature move. You're absolutely right. The way that he stands with his hands clasped behind his back, that's a signature move for Arcann too.
Mhm.
And we have a bunch of signature phrases, as we discussed, when he talks about being by our character's side. That's a signature phrase for him.
Mhm.
Talking about becoming someone that our character deserves, proving
Yep.
himself worthy. That's also a signature phrase, and an echo that just reiterates one of the key themes from the earlier romance scenes.
So what do you think, Mara? What did we think of this story update? If you couldn't
right.
tell already, if you'd not
It
been
was
listening
okay.
the entire time. Yeah,
I know.
that's all right. Oh my gosh, it was amazing.
It was so good.
It
It
blew
was
everything out of the water that we ever hoped it could be, right? We
Yeah.
got way more content. He had way more lines. He played a way bigger part in the story. We had a scene with Sana Ray and Arcann together. We had romance twice in this
Yeah.
amazing scene. We had a wonderful reunion. He plays such a big role, and he's the established hero of the story.
Mhm. Yeah.
Transcendent love moments of a hug. Oh my gosh, the turmoil within, but the promise of moving in the right direction. There's that hope at the end. The
Mhm.
slow burn in terms of the romance. We didn't get a proposal, which is great.
It
There's
is great because we love the slow burn.
Oh, I know. We're all about the slow burn.
Please, devs, keep dragging this out.
Keep dragging it out, but don't forget it. Don't forget
Yeah.
it. Just keep dragging it out. There's literally, I can't think of anything else that could have improved this. It's everything I ever wanted, unless it was just possibly even more Arcann screen time.
Okay, well, not to be Debbie Downer, but we
Oh
both
no.
know that I'm the person who can always think of something that I would have liked done
Oh
differently. So I
no.
do actually have a couple of very small nitpicky things that I would have liked to see that we did not get.
Okay, let's give it to us. You better finish up with something extremely uplifting again, because this is the best stuff ever. Go
I
ahead.
promise. We did not learn the name of this planet. We still don't know what it's called. It was one of the things that I asked for in our previous proclamations that I did not get. I would have liked to have known what that planet is called, simply because I find it really awkward that we have to keep referring to it as that planet that Arcann went to somewhere in wild space. We don't exactly know where. I would have loved slightly more concrete information about it. But what we did get is a lot of information about the planet. We now know what the weirdness that we've previously discussed was all about when Arkann said this place is even stranger than Sana Ray could have prepared me for. We now know exactly what he meant by that, which goes a really long way to satisfy my curiosity about the planet. We also did not learn exactly how much time has passed. So I guess time is still subjective or
That's
up
true.
for player interpretation. It's not necessarily something that I had to know, but I've got to admit I would have preferred it because, and I think anybody else who writes fan fiction or perhaps does role playing in the game can relate to why it's nice to have a timeline and have some kind of idea of how much time has passed. It just makes it easier for those of us who like to do those transformative fan creations. So I still hope that at some point we will get some kind of official timeline from the devs. And I'm also holding out hope, even though it's a faint hope by now, that we will learn the name of this planet at some point. Having said that, those things are really, really small compared to how immensely satisfied I am with everything that we did get. All of the things that really meant something. We got all of those things. And I agree with you completely, Bodhi. There's no way that the devs or the writers could have done, or the animators could have done Arcann any more justice than they did in this scene.
And also shout out to Eric Tadellums too. He just, oh my gosh.
Oh yeah.
He knocked it out of the park. Everyone
He always does. He does.
He really does a great job with Arcann.
Yeah.
Love it so much.
So thank you, Dellums. Thank you, devs. Thank you, everybody on the SWTOR team, for giving us just the best thing that we could have possibly hoped for.
It hit us as NJs extremely hard, more than you'll ever know.
Yeah.
I guess 10 out of 10, no notes. And I guess you could chalk this up to essentially being a common SWTOR dev team. Arcann win. It's always a win, right? It's always a win every single time.
I think you phrased that as eloquently and as perfectly as anybody
10 out of 10,
could.
no notes. Devs, we love you so much. Let's go. We need more. We need more. We're addicts now.
Yeah, we are. We're addicts. Give us a slow burn.
So
draw it out as long as you possibly can. But please do give us the conclusion too, because we need to see that eventually.
We definitely do. One more thing. If you guys can imagine, this is just the summary of our proclamation using a few points of our framework and the threads that we're pulling out of these two scenes from this story update. So stay tuned. We're going to actually do super deep dives into all these different threads and different proclamations. And we're so very, very, very excited to be discussing them in the future. It's like a fountain of material. It's just overflowing.
And also it was very hard for us to actually boil this down to the essential things that we wanted to talk about.
So with that being said, we're very excited to see you in the next proclamation. Until then,
farewell for now.
This concludes another episode of Platform 6 Cantina, a Star Wars The Old Republic podcast.